something was stolen, and it was seen, a bicycle was stolen, it was seen in the backyard, and therefore you can go and look for it. I mean, so the Fourth Amendment was intended to create a constitutional buffer between U.S. citizens and the intimidating power of law enforcement. It has three components. First, it establishes a privacy interest by recognizing the right of U.S. citizens to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects. Second, it protects its privacy interest by prohibiting searches and seizures that are unreasonable or are not authorized by a warrant based upon probable cause. Third, it states that no warrant may be issued to a law enforcement officer unless that warrant describes with particularity the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This is very, very important and has a huge effect on the Snowden case. Remember the good old days when we had a small government and lots of privacy? The only way that you can think of the good old days as the good old days is you simply refuse to visit them objectively. So during the pseudo-war with France, there was this Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 were passed by the Federalist Congress. It made it illegal to criticize a federal government official, or any federal government officials, even if the criticism was true, with the exception of Jefferson, I believe, who was a vice president, but didn't want to be protected, or wasn't to be protected by this fundamentally democratic thing. In the 1920s, there was a predecessor to the NSA called the Cipher Bureau, also known as the Black Chamber. So the Black Chamber's mission was to monitor international telegraphs for threats to national security. See how much things change? The Chamber approached Western Union, the nation's largest telegraph company, hoping to gain access to the messages traveling as telegraph lines. Just as Verizon is today, Western Union was more than happy to comply, giving the Chamber's secret access to its customers' private communications. Now, I don't blame the companies too much. When faced with the awesome power, might, and terror apparatus of the federal government, it's not that hard to cave. During World War II, Project Shamrock gave the Armed Forces Security Agency, which became the NSA, daily access to the communication records of Western Union, RCA Global, and ITT. Shamrock was legal during World War II. But shockingly, the government program designed to work during the war did not stop when the war ended. Do you remember how, 1917, the income tax was introduced as a temporary war measure, soon to have its 100th year anniversary and have gone up many, many dozens of times in rates since the beginning. Shamrock was legal during World War II, but did not stop until the war did, continuing until 1975, the Nixon problem. We'll get to that in a sec. And at the height of this program, it collected and analyzed over 150,000 messages a month, with no search warrants or court oversight. The good old days when privacy was assured. So then, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed in 1978 after it was learned that President Nixon had used federal resources, including the FBI's COINTELPRO, to spy on his political opponents, such as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I had a dream that my dreams would be monitored by the government. So FISA created a secret court. Ooh, there's nothing like a secret court for the fine administration of justice. And the secret court authorized warrants to surveil foreign nationals inside the U.S. Now, there are some criticisms that the FISA court was rubber stamping warrant requests based upon the tiny amount of information that we have, which is there were 18,000 warrant requests in the first 26 years of this court's existence. It denied, let me see if I have enough fingers and thumbs. It denied, 5! It denied 5 of those requests. That could be considered a rubber stamp. Let's talk about Echelon. So this is in the 1970s, under a system code named Echelon. The NSA and its junior partners in Britain, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada operated a network of massive, highly automated interception stations covering the globe amongst them. Any of the partners can ask for any of the other partners to intercept its own domestic communications. Right, so if you want to track someone in the U.S. and you're the American government, all you do is you ask Canada to track someone in the U.S. because the U.S. is a foreigner to Canada and vice versa. And therefore, you can say, well, we don't spy on our own citizens. We ask our neighbors to do that. Much, much different. Echelon was carried out with any official acknowledgement of its existence because, remember, robust debate is essential to a democracy, let alone any democratic oversight or public or legislative debate as to whether it serves a decent purpose. The extensiveness of the Echelon global network is a product of decades of intense Cold War activity. Yet with the end of the Cold War, its budget, far from being greatly reduced or eliminated, was increased, and the network has grown in both power and reach. Never let a good crisis go to waste. Now, it's not just about spying on people. Let's talk about some commercial spying or espionage. So German security experts discovered several years ago that the Echelon was engaged in heavy commercial spying in Europe. Victims included such German firms as the wind generator manufacturer Enercon. So in 1998, Enercon developed what it thought was a secret invention, enabling it to generate electricity from wind power at far cheaper rates than before. Tragically, when the company tried to market its invention in the US, it was confronted by its American rival Kenetech, which announced it had already patented a near-identical piece of technology. Kenetech then brought a court order against Enercon to ban the sale of its equipment in the US. You see, because we live in such a free market paradise. In a rare public disclosure, an NSA employee who refused to be named agreed to appear in silhouette on German television to reveal how he had stolen Enercon's secrets by tapping the telephone and computer link lines that ran between Enercon's research lab and its production unit some 12 miles away. Detailed plans of the company's invention were then passed on to Kenetech. Trade spying in 1994, Thomson SA, located in Paris, and Airbus Industrie, based in Blagnac, Cedex, France, also lost lucrative contracts snatched away by American rivals, aided by information covertly collected by NSA and the CIA. The same agencies also eavesdropped on Japanese representatives during negotiations with the US in 1995 over auto parts trade. So the US has been trying to persuade European Union countries as well to allow it backdoor access to encryption programs, claiming that this was to serve the needs of law enforcement agencies. Oh yes, it's always law enforcement. A report released by the European Parliament in May 1999 asserted that Washington's plans for controlling encryption software in Europe had nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with US industrial espionage. See, if a European company does really well, the government doesn't collect taxes from it, but if an American company does well, the American government collects taxes from it, so it has an incentive to promote the interests of American companies. Code breaking. The NSA has dispatched FBI agents on break-in missions to snatch code books from foreign facilities in the U.S., and CIA officers to recruit foreign communications clerks abroad and buy their code secrets, according to veteran intelligence officials. By the way, if you've made it this far, since I always get this question at least about 100 times, all the sources are in the low bar for the video or the notes for the podcast. For decades, beginning in the 1950s, the Swiss company Crypto AG, not a bad name for a punk band, sold the world's most sophisticated and secure encryption technology. The purchasing nations, there were about 120 who bought this technology, including prime U.S. intelligence targets such as Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Yugoslavia. They were confident that their communications were protected, and so they sent messages from their capitals, their embassies, and military missions, trade offices, and espionage dens around the world via telex, radio, and fax. Ask your parents. All the while because of a secret agreement between the company and the NSA. These governments might as well have been hand-delivering their messages to Washington uncoded. Their Crypto AG machines had been rigged before being sold to them so that when they used them, the random encryption key could be automatically and clandestinely transmitted, along with the enciphered message. So you were getting the encrypted message plus the decryption key was being sent to Washington. NSA analysts could read the messages as easily as they could the morning newspaper, which I think even back then was covering the Zimmerman trial. Now, this is a bit more controversial. Microsoft denies this, but I thought I'd put forward this case. In September, this is a new meaning to Windows. In September 1999, it was revealed the NSA had arranged with Microsoft to insert special keys into Windows software in all versions from 95 OSR2 onwards. An American computer scientist in North Carolina had disassembled parts of the Windows instruction code and found the smoking gun. Microsoft's developers had failed to remove the debugging symbols used to test the software before they released it. Inside the code were the labels for two keys. One was called key, the other was called NSA key. Microsoft again denies this. Fernandez presented his findings at a conference at which some Windows developers were also in attendance. The developers did not deny that the NSA key was built into their software, but they refused to talk about what the key did or why it had been put there without users' knowledge. Fernandez says that the NSA's backdoor in the world's most commonly used operating system makes it orders of magnitude easier for the US government to access your computer. According to the recent Snowden leaks, the level of collusion between Microsoft Corporation and the NSA is really quite astonishing. Microsoft allows the NSA to skirt encryption protocols on Outlook, Skype video, and cloud services such as SkyDrive, and data captured by the NSA is routinely passed on to both the FBI and CIA. In February 2000, it was disclosed that the Strategic Affairs Delegation, the DAS, the intelligence arm of the French Defense Ministry, had prepared a report in 1999 which also asserted that the NSA had helped to install secret programs in Microsoft software. According to the DAS report, quote, "It would seem that the creation of Microsoft was largely supported, not least financially, by the NSA, and that IBM was made to accept the Microsoft MS-DOS operating system by the same administration." Real open gates. The report stated that there had been a, quote, "strong suspicion of a lack of security fed by insistent rumors about the existence of spy programs on Microsoft and by the presence of NSA personnel in Bill Gates' development teams." The Pentagon said the report was Microsoft's biggest client in the world, and actually for years there has been a Microsoft liaison office at the NSA buildings. Now, you've probably heard about this recently. Police departments, they use these automated license plate recognition cameras to track where you're going. The cameras record the movement of all passing vehicles and store the information in a centralized database. Police in real time can find vehicles on a hot list to issue tickets for expired registration or unpaid parking tickets. Cars have been towed from home driveways, Walmart parking lots, and even outside church during services for alleged non-payments of as little as $50. The data showed that in most jurisdictions, 99% of the vehicles recorded had done nothing wrong. Maryland, for instance, tracked 85 million license plates in 2012, and of the 0.2% flagged as violation, 97% of them had expired registrations. So it's a revenue-gathering tool. Only 0.005% of the total reads pointed to a serious crime. Even if a hit is registered, it does not mean that the vehicle is actually being driven by a criminal, as the database information is frequently wrong, something that has led to fatal mistakes in the UK, where license plate cameras are even more widely used. U.S. law enforcement agencies rarely place any limits on the use of this information. The Scarsdale, New York Police Department says the use is only limited by the officer's imagination. So let's look at some of the laws surrounding Snowden's revelations. So there's this thing called the third-party doctrine. The third-party doctrine is a legal principle that, in effect, you lose your Fourth Amendment rights when you relinquish information to a third party. This ruling said that by giving data, such as phone numbers, to a third party, such as a phone company, you'd given up any expectation of privacy in that data. That ruling was made in 1979, but is now used to suggest you've given up an expectation of privacy in lots of data you give to online services. There is, to me at least, a bit of a difference between an expectation of privacy and turning a whole bunch of stuff over to the government. When the Fourth Amendment was drafted, of course, the vast majority of people's private activities occurred inside the home, so it made sense to make the home the focus of Fourth Amendment protections. But as people began conducting more and more of their lives outside of the home, with telephones, email, credit cards, and so forth, using the four walls of the home as the boundary for the Fourth Amendment protection made less and less sense. Now, just by the by, common law, law that is sort of private and evolves based upon circumstances, tend to keep step with changing technology, but government law generally doesn't. Whatever is surrounded by force, like government laws and edicts and so on, regulations, they tend to get frozen in time. So precisely what the Supreme Court recognized this in the famous 1967 case of Katz versus the United States, which held that the Fourth Amendment applied to wiretapping of public payphones, because the Fourth Amendment protects people, not places. So they said you could not wiretap public payphones. So save us, Supreme Court. Oh dear. Well, maybe not. The Supreme Court effectively says there's no way to challenge warrantless wiretapping. So the court basically says that any harm is speculative, and thus there can't be any standing at all. Quote, "We decline to abandon our usual reluctance to endorse standing theories that rest on speculation about the decisions of independent actors." Does that clear it up for you? Quote, "We need only assume that the government is doing its job to find out about and combat terrorism in order to conclude that there is a high probability that the government will intercept at least some electronic communications to which at least some of the plaintiffs are parties. The majority is wrong when it describes the harm threatened plaintiffs as speculative." So, just trust the government. I'm not sure when one B. Spears was elevated to a seat at the Supreme Court, but I guess she did. Now I'll follow a couple of internet activists and refer to this as the Patriot Act, because the Patriot has some moral value that is co-opted by a fundamentally Darth Vader-ish evil piece of legislation. The Patriot Act includes a requirement to obtain a U.S. court order of 72 hours after surveillance has taken place for U.S. citizens.